What we're trying to do at MatterVest is basically to try to create an ecosystem for sustainable finance. But the webinar today is not about MatterVest. It's about initiative, a campaign that we are going to be launching today, which is called My Money, My Planet. The campaign idea actually occurred to me and Diane as we looked at the transparency and as we carved our journey through sustainable finance while building MatterVest. And one thing we realized was that one of the biggest issues that we are not aware of while working in the sustainability sphere, or actually trying to be more sustainable personally, is the role that our money can actually play in creating a much better planet. And that's how the campaign My Money, My Planet started. What we'll be doing today is we have the pleasure of having Jacob from 2 Degree Investing Initiative with us, who will actually take us through some of his work, his views on sustainable finance, and talk a bit more about their work at 2 Degree, which will be followed by Diane, who will be talking to you in detail about the campaign, what is it all about, what we're trying to do. And I think unlike many other webinars that I've been attending a lot of late, this is a webinar where we'll all ask you to take an action by the end of it, so that it doesn't tend to be a 45-minute exercise where we just go back with some notes. We want to take action, and we want to create a movement and kickstart it. This event won't be possible without the support of a lot of partners that we have, especially the Sustainability Circle at the Factory Berlin, which has been kind enough to support us and to reach out to the community. The Sustainability Circle at Factory Berlin is basically a community of sustainability-focused individuals talking on a range of topics. So do check them out on Meetup. They have a group where a lot of interesting events are posted, and you can join them if that's something of interest to you. Some housekeeping rules. The event is being recorded. It's also running on Facebook Live, as I mentioned a while back, so that people could also see it over there, and also on the groups of MatterVest. So without taking any further time away from the real meat of the event, I would pass the screen to Jacob. So Jacob, you can share your screen and get started and tell us a bit more about the topic of sustainable finance and your work at 2 Degree.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I just started my presentation while still being on mute, so I'll give that another go. Hi, thanks for all the interest and the opportunity to speak today. I hope this works better now. It's really great to see that many people on the call. My name is Jacob Thome. I'm Managing Director at the 2 Degrees Investing Initiative. We're a nonprofit think tank. So we're 100% grant funded. We don't sell any services or have any clients, working at the intersection of climate change, finance, and long-term risks. And we have a relatively large research program on the question of mobilizing retail investors and supporting consumer protection around sustainability preferences in financial markets. So as highlighted, this is obviously a topic that a number of people don't necessarily think about intuitively. When they think about sustainability, they think about going to the supermarket, maybe when they think about buying a car. So a range of different areas of life, but in fact, finance and where you put your money is quite an important part of sustainability preferences. Indeed, it's one that's largely overlooked. It's one where there are a lot of problems in terms of making sure that the people that want to invest sustainably or want to make sure their money goes to sustainable uses actually have that happen. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how to think about the interface between finance, sustainability, preferences, and also some of the challenges that we've identified in the market. So the way to maybe bring that concept a little bit closer is to think about elections, right? So using the European example, we have about 513 million people in Europe, so this still counts the UK, which are of course normally still associated until the end of the year. Out of those 513 million at the last European Parliament elections, 410 are eligible to vote, and roughly 210 million people voted at the last European Parliament election. And out of those 210 million people, around 180 million people voted for parties that quote unquote support the Paris Agreement. Now, of course, not all those parties are created equal. We have, the Green Party that's very ambitious. We have other parties that support it, but, are a little bit more on the fence. But all in all, there's a huge support across the political spectrum for the idea that climate change is real, that the Paris Agreement should be supported and the goals of the Paris Agreement should be achieved. And again, we also appreciate that not every one of those 180 million people necessarily explicitly voted for the Paris Agreement, but de facto we have a political process that gets a lot of support. So I want to try to illustrate how the same concept fails in finance, right? So let's take the same universe of people again. We have about 513 million people in Europe. Around 107 million of those people are pension fund beneficiaries and members. And out of those 107 million people, we've actually done a survey in France and Germany. There's also been other people that have done surveys in other countries. So we have about 2/3 to 4/5 of people, when asked, want to have some type of environmental preference or sustainability preference. They either want to actually have an environmental impact in the real economy. They want to do no harm, right? So they don't necessarily worry about having an impact itself, but they don't want to invest in coal, or because they don't want to be majority. It's incidentally roughly the same amount of people that quote unquote voted for Paris Agreement at the last European Parliament election. Roughly the same percentage when surveyed also said we want to support environmental objectives in some form or manage environmental issues in some form, right? And around 1/5 of people say, no, I'm not interested in this. So our analysis shows that in Europe, roughly 80 to 90 million people across pension fund beneficiaries, so everyone who has a pension fund in some form or has benefits from some type of pension investment, roughly 80 to 90 million people would quote unquote vote for Paris, right? The problem is that in reality, when you look at elections, quote unquote, financial markets, so people voting at shareholder assemblies, at AGMs, people engaging with the companies that they own. So the owners of capital, essentially, of the owners of capital, only about 20 to 25% vote in favor of the Paris Agreement. So if you think about the owner of capital, it's ultimately all of us, right? Through our pensions, as retail investors, through our insurance products, even through our personal investments, right? Even when we vote in elections, 85% vote for environmental issues. When we vote on the Paris Agreement in finance, only 20 to 25% vote in favor. Which means that in practice, 60 million EU pension fund beneficiaries and members are forced to vote against the Paris Agreement every year, either directly because there's a climate resolution that's available, or indirectly by being forced to vote for management that doesn't align with the Paris Agreement, right? So if you own a share in a company and that company's management is employing strategies that are misaligned with your sustainability preferences, by supporting the manager of those companies, you are essentially voting against your sustainability preferences. Just imagine if you run a restaurant, you employ a restaurant manager and you want your restaurant to be a fish restaurant, and the restaurant manager decides to make it a beef and burger restaurant. You wouldn't put up with that manager being charged much longer. That is essentially what's happening in financial markets at a broad scale. Collectively, millions and tens of millions of Europeans, and obviously tens of millions of citizens around the world, own capital, own restaurants, and are putting up with management being misaligned with the preferences that they'd like to see implemented. So if you count actually that second part, you're upwards of 80 million Europeans that are systematically disenfranchised in financial markets. And of course, that number also relates to retail investors, right? So if you are a retail investor, you are faced with the same situation. Quite often your investment manager votes for you, and when they do vote for you, then they vote against the Paris Agreement de facto in the overwhelming majority of cases. So as highlighted, essentially we have a major democracy gap and a consumer protection issue, right? The owners of capital, citizens in Europe, citizens around the world, don't get to vote with their money. It's their money, it's their planet. as the theme of this campaign suggests, and this is in practice not being realized. So why is this happening? What is going on in practice, right? Well, essentially two different pieces are happening. One of the things is that we've done this analysis in France. So we did these mystery shopping visits. So, we went 100 times to 100 different bank offices and said, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Financial Advisor, I'm interested in environmental impact. How can I vote with my money? How can I make sure my sustainability preferences are reflected? So when we look at the results, these are preliminary, subject to a final review, but essentially what's happening is the financial advisor in only a fraction of the cases actually ask spontaneously about sustainability objections, right? And the overwhelming majority of cases, they essentially ignore or block those questions altogether, right? So most of the time, financial advisors, even when you ask them, express interest in this issue, they still block the implementation of that. So in the absence of a suitable product, what happens then once you finally crack through and say, all right, I want an environmental product, and what happens when they don't have a suitable product? Again, in the overwhelming majority of cases, the advisor essentially tries to convince you that the product is suitable, or that the product is not suitable, but still tries to sell it. And actually in Europe, that is illegal, right? So there's legislation against this behavior, because unlike in a supermarket, if you go to a supermarket and you say, hey, I'd like to buy some vegan beef, for example, right? So some plant-based alternative to beef, the supermarket person working in the supermarket can say, well, okay, we don't have a plant-based alternative to beef, but we have a plant-based alternative to chicken. Is that still of interest to you, right? So that's perfectly legal. In the financial markets in Europe, that would be illegal, right? Because what they want to avoid happening is they want to avoid saying, oh, you're interested in a safe product, but here we have some great subprime mortgages, right? So once you tell your bank advisor, I want to invest in an environmental product that has environmental impact, them ignoring that for you makes them legally liable. It puts them at risk of damages if you decided to sue them afterwards. So the legislation here is very, very strict, but the compliance with legislation is very low. So there's a systematic problem here at the moment when you're investing your money, whether you're a retail investor or whether you're a member of a pension fund, right? So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is that the way these funds are communicated misleads systematically these retail investors. Now, it's important here to note, I'm not talking about professional investors, institutional investors. They obviously have the bandwidth and capability to parse marketing material, right? But many of us here, we don't have the time, we don't have the brain space to think about finance every single day. So we're coming in here, we're hoping that when it says on the packaging it's green, that it actually is green, right? And so we've done an analysis of the fund-related impact claims, and we see that they are systematically misleading, and even in a number of cases, meet the category of being deceptive or inaccurate. So here's just some of the examples, right? So all these marketing claims say that if you put $1 into a fund, you're immediately reducing this amount of greenhouse gases in the real economy, okay? And the trouble, of course, is that what you're just doing is you're putting money between it from a brown company, maybe to a green company, from a high carbon company to a low carbon company. Maybe you're taking money away from a weapons manufacturer. Maybe you're taking money away from a cigarette company that you might be against, or other vices, right? So these are all these claims that are being made, but that doesn't necessarily translate that we will have less cigarettes in the world, right? That we will have less carbon in the world. That is you making a voting with your money. That's the first step. The second step is then obviously that being translated into real world effect. And so the two challenges that we see is that there's, at the point when you're buying your financial product, you're not getting what you deserve. And at the point where, though you're listening to the marketing material, you're not hearing the truth about what's happening. Now, the good news is that first, the legislation is already there to protect us. We just need to stand up and fight for it. We need to stand up to make sure that that legislation actually gets implemented, that the kind of mis-selling we've identified in our mystery shopping visit stops, essentially. And we did it in France, but I'm sure you'd have very similar experiences in other jurisdictions. That we make sure that marketing is responsible, and that we make sure that when we vote in elections, we vote for Paris, and we vote with our money, we also vote for Paris. So I'll leave it here as sort of an overview of this discussion. Happy for you to reach out to me if you have questions. You can find all of these reports, all the research material on our website at www.2degrees-investing.org. I also want to make sure that people understand that we are 100% nonprofit, like I said off the top. So we're working on trying to support the public, citizens, on understanding their rights, understanding their opportunities here. So we're very supportive of initiatives that help take that road forward. But we don't sell any services and we don't have any clients. So all of this research that we're doing does not have a commercial or a for-profit interest. Just so as a, as a general disclaimer, because in this time that we live in, obviously it's very important for people to understand who funds the work and what interests are behind it. So I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to take questions, happy to expand more on one or the other aspect, or happy to provide more information.
Thanks a lot, Jacob. That was actually quite interesting. And guys, for everyone to know, I think there were a couple of questions that we already got, Jacob, on how can people access the research. And what I mentioned is that most of the research actually is available online on the website. So you can actually visit the website, and there are a lot of interesting reports that you can actually go through. And as Jacob mentioned, that it's an unbiased view, right? Because of the way the funding of the 2-degree investing initiative is. And there is a bunch of interesting stuff. I think the most recent research is the retail investor landscape for sustainable investing in Germany and France. Jacob, if I'm not wrong,
yeah,
that's one of the most recent papers. So, you will find tons of good resources, and I know some of you had asked the questions on where to find it. So the website, I think, is the space. And yes, the best part is you don't need to pay to access some really good quality research. So thanks a lot for that introduction, Jacob, picking it up from where you left it, knowing that what funds these initiatives, as well as what is funding your saving, the saving that you do in a bank, where is that going, and understanding that linkage is very important, which is kind of the crux of the campaign, My Money, My Planet. I'll let Diane talk in detail about it and take us through the campaign that we are trying to do and what are our objectives and what we are trying to achieve through that. So Diane, this is over to you to take it.
Thank you, Mayur. Cool. So I'm excited. This is a campaign that we've been preparing for a long time. So I'm excited to launch it with all of you on this call. And it's an impressive number. So I'm happy we've achieved it for now. So this is the launch. So the biggest impact is yet to come. But I'm happy we're already here to launch and get some impact with our money. Okay, so as normally you can see my slides, and yes, we're launching the My Money, My Planet campaign. This campaign was done because we really began to understand that people didn't link their money to sustainability. And that's why we want this hashtag to be trending and change the financial system. But yeah, let me give you a bit of background. So as you can see, and if you are in Europe, you can see that sustainable consumption is becoming the norm. It slowly is, but it is, and that gives us hope. However, when it comes to our money and the link to sustainability, it's something that people don't think about. People are uncomfortable talking about their money. People, it's unsettling and cumbersome and complicated. So people just don't do it. However, money has a huge impact, and I'm just gonna illustrate that with an example. Last year, we had the Amazon forest fires in 2019. These were devastating fires, not by their size, because they were not the biggest yet, but they were devastating because they were human-led. And human-led means that they were caused by companies who were responsible for the deforestation. And those companies were funded by major financial institutions. Some of them were huge European banks that maybe you and I have our money in. So our savings, which are in these banks, were directly linked to the Amazon forest fires. And a lot of us have been posting on those on social media about these fires, and we were horrified by them. However, we didn't know that we had a link with them. So yes, so we are acting, and I guess as most of you on this call already striving towards more sustainable habits, well, we are recycling more. We are on Fridays in the streets for more climate action. Our money might be doing the total opposite. And that's something that we want to fix. And that's something that we want to call out for people to fix and ask their banks for more transparency. So we are not, we're just willing for people to realize that while we're doing A, our money might be doing B, and it's time for our money to be doing and striving for the same world as we are doing with our consumption. And because yes, it's something that not a lot of people know, but our money has a huge impact on our carbon footprint. And a Swedish bank, Nordea, has made a research that our money and where it's invested, where it's kept aside, can have up to 27 times more impact than our consumption habits in terms of carbon footprint. So it's a simple gesture, yet it's a tremendous impact that we can have. And this movement is not the start, because the trend has been going on, and Triodos, which is a sustainable bank, just did a research in the UK and found out that 7 out of 10 people want to have more transparency on what their money is funding, what their money is funding, sorry. And so we really want to have this campaign, My Money, My Planet, give this final push so that banks really realize that we as customers want our money to be funding what we really believe in. So yes, this is about action, and that's, I think, the exciting part of this campaign. We are asking you to join by taking 3 major actions. So let's go through them. The first is signing a digital manifesto. So we have looked into how to ask banks and how to raise that question. And we've basically written a text, which is available on our website, which will show you just after. And it talks about what I just told you within this presentation. And if you sign that letter, if you put the name of your bank, we can actually send a letter to your bank on your behalf, asking them where your money is going. We've done it as a team because we trialed the campaign before, and a lot of our banks didn't even answer, or a lot of answers were pretty vague. And that's where we need numbers, and we need a lot more people to ask, so that they really think it's a recurring question and that people really care about it, so that change really occurs. Second thing is, we'll ask you to share. Share on social media, snap a selfie with your bank cards and tag your bank and ask them where your money is going. Just use the hashtag #MyMoneyMyPlanet, because yes, we want our money to be impacting in a positive way our planet, and so that the movement becomes trending. And then last but not least, share. We just made a website which has just been launched today, and that is the best way for you to share it. You can share it with your friends, with any partners or any communities that you think might be a great fit for this movement. We're always looking to onboard more people, and yeah, that's how we want to do it. So, and just before I'm going to redirect you to the website and show you how it's done. I just wanted to end with this. The financial system today rules the world. And so I think that, and I really do believe that together we can change it, and we can change it for the better. Because as you saw with Jacob's presentation, it's not the best out yet. So let me just go through the website. And this is the website. This is brand new. This just got launched today. And so you can see, I'll just go through the website with you. So this is the manifesto that you can sign. So you can put your name, your email, and your bank name. We're not putting it as mandatory. So if you don't want to, you're totally normal. You just, like, it's totally fine. We'll just add your name to the list of people who signed. Then you can take action, and that's where all the actions that I talked about are listed. So you can first sign the manifesto, then second, take a selfie with your bank logo and the message. And this is a caption that you can use, and then you can spread the word and download. There's a kit for you to download with some images, captions, and messages you can share with your friends and family. So yeah, and I just wanted to go live with this campaign, and I'll stop sharing my screen and ask all my team to come on the call and also do some. Okay, I'm not sure. Okay, let me. Okay, cool. So let us do that first picture of the campaign. Let us do that first and really start the campaign. So let me take, so you can see Alessandro and Emma. So I'm basically going to, we're basically going to take a selfie with our bank cards and then tag our banks and ask where our money is going. If you want to do it as well, you're welcome to. And it would be great if you could.
And I think just to add to what Diane was saying, I told you that at this webinar, we really want people to take actions. So it would be great if you guys can join us. There's your bank to tag and My Money, My Planet as a hashtag to use. I'm choosing an easier alternative, which is posting it as an Insta story, but you can choose to post it wherever you want. So really would love more of you join this, because this is the real launch of the campaign, actually.
Cool, that's it for me.
Okay, thanks a lot, Diane. So we're running well on time, which is great, and we want to give more and more time for Q&A. So we hope to see more and more selfies and more questions being asked, which is the purpose of this. And let's kickstart asking the questions part by doing the Q&A. Some of the questions that we've got are in the chat. I'll try to address those as well. I'll get started with the Q&A questions, and Jacob, maybe you could unmute yourself at this point in time, because some of the initial questions are addressed to you. And we have a question from Carla, who's talking about the fact that today is the last day to give feedback on the EU 2030 climate targets. And she's asking, in which way are you involved in the feedback process up to now?
That's a relatively quick answer. So our work really focuses on the finance sector part of the climate movement, less so on the real economy side. It's not a comment on what's more or less important. It's just a comment on where our expertise is at. So we obviously encourage you all to get involved and provide feedback on that. There's also a lot of consultation process outstanding on financial regulation and sustainability right now, on EU benchmarks, low carbon benchmarks, on ESG disclosures, on the next Sustainable Finance Action Plan that the EU is supporting. So make sure you get involved in those headline 2030 climate action processes, but also if you do want to get involved on this topic, there's plenty of policy action on the financial sector side as well that you can get involved in.
Perfect. I'll move on to the next question, which is, Jacob, since you are on unmute, let's use that opportunity. So the next question is from Sana, which is about, and she's asking, what would be a non-misleading way to communicate the benefits of ESG or SRI compliant investments?
So the big problem is that when you communicate financial performance of a fund, you have to put a disclaimer at the bottom that says future performance isn't guaranteed, right? There's a lot of rules around that. If I went out tomorrow and said, you invest in my fund and I will give you 20,000% return and I will make you a millionaire, nobody would accept that. Legally, I'd be in trouble within a heartbeat. But I can write on my fund, you will save 20 million tons of carbon with your fund in the future. That's uncertain, right? And so why don't we have the same rules around, there's two rules here that we think we need to follow when it comes to marketing. One is we need to not treat, we need to have the same rules that we have for financial performance that we have for environmental performance, recognizing that the future is uncertain. And the second thing is we need to actually, if you make those claims, then you need to have a measurement system in place to measure that, right? So if you're making a claim that investing in a fund is the equivalent of taking 5,000 cars off the road, then you need to measure actually whether your fund is actually contributing to that. In many cases, that doesn't take place, right? I mean, many of the funds that are marketed as sustainable don't vote sustainably at shareholder resolutions. That's part and parcel of your sustainability strategy. You want to vote with your money. All the people on the call here are now going to contact their bank with this campaign that's launched, right? So just because you own the shares doesn't mean your job is done. And I think that's a critical part, is treating it like financial performance. There's rules around that. Why don't we stick to them? And making sure you actually measure your real world impact, not just your virtual impact of moving shares around without necessarily knowing what happens in the real world.
Yeah, and keeping that question and going a bit deeper, Jacob, when you guys are doing a research and the analysis part, how easy is it for you guys to do the analysis in terms of the transparency and the reporting structures that you see currently across? Because sustainable finance can be confusing with all its terminology, right? So, and which makes it easy to manipulate also for different banks. So, what are your views on that part?
Well, it's obviously there's some challenges, and environmental data has a lot of challenges. We all know that, at least we have a sense for it. It's true everywhere in life, right? I mean, even if you think about, you buy a Tesla and then you've got the lithium batteries and conflict minerals. I mean, it's difficult, right? But that doesn't absolve us from trying to do our best to do the right thing. I think that's an important first thing to remember. And the other part is there's two parts that are pretty straightforward, which is, do you have motive, right? Or this is the first part. So a lot of funds are moving out of fossil fuel now because the price is low. But that doesn't, once the price is back up, you're moving back in, right? So the first thing is, do you actually have, as part of your fund mandate, is the person who's managing that money on a day-to-day basis, is part of their job description to invest sustainably and to drive real-world environmental positive benefit, right? And if that isn't part of your job description, then that doesn't fly, essentially, right? And the second part is, with all these environmental data concerns, you can still track, for example, how an asset manager has voted at shareholder resolutions, right? So we don't necessarily always know all the companies. There's different ways to look at the same issue. But if there's a shareholder resolution that says you should have a strategy to be Paris Agreement compliant, it's kind of binary. You're either for it or you're against it. And when you're against it, then that becomes a challenge to claim that you're sustainable when you're voting against resolutions like that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I wanted to link that question to another question that we've got in the Q&A, as well as a comment from Phoebe. And the question that we've got is, what is our opinion on BlackRock supporting EU for the creation of sustainability benchmark for banks? And in the chat, we had another question on similar lines, that the EU has chosen BlackRock to advise on how EU banks integrate ESG. And what are our comments as 2Degree and MatterWest in running this campaign about it. Since BlackRock is BlackRock and is of course a major investor in fossil fuel. So maybe you can go ahead first and then I'll follow.
Yeah, it's definitely raised a lot of eyebrows, that's for sure. I think we need to disentangle the fact that BlackRock invests in fossil fuels doesn't by itself create the conflict of interest. I think the conflict of interest exists if you are advising on a policy framework where you have advisory services or banking services or investment services that will perform better or worse depending on how the policy framework plays out. But that is incidentally also true when you pick Deloitte, I would say, for this type of thing, right? The first thing Deloitte is going to do when they develop their banking guidelines for the European Commission, their input is to say everything should be audited. And yes. So, okay, that's pretty convenient because you're an auditing company. So I think this is a problem. I think right now a lot of the attention is, okay, BlackRock is particularly easy target because they invest in fossil fuels, they're a large investment manager, and that's all fair. I'm not, discounting that. All I'm saying is I think this conflict of interest policy is broken more broadly. And BlackRock is not, I think if Deloitte would have been picked, we wouldn't have had this public backlash, but it also has a lot of conflicts of interest with it. And I think that's just quite tricky to, and I'm sorry, I don't want to, I'll try to be brief in my answer knowing we have limited time, but it's perfectly okay for commercial companies to follow their commercial mandate, right? I don't think there is a problem with a bank, trying to sell environmental products or trying to sell these different types of products. It's on us as consumers to create accountability and be a consumer that says, I want you to sell me a sustainable product, not a normal product, right? But it's not sort of the flaw in the commercial conflict of interest is the fact that policymakers are allowing that. It's not that BlackRock is taking advantage of that. And I think we need to look not at BlackRock for doing this work, but at the European Commission's rules around managing conflicts of interest that are, whether it's BlackRock or Deloitte, just simply unmanaged. And we were involved in the high-level expert group on sustainable finance, and it was the same situation there. You have the Deloittes of the world and the PwCs. The first thing they say is, well, it needs to be in the annual report, it needs to be audited, we need this and that and a third. And that's unfortunately the world we live in, and we don't have enough policy accountability. But blaming Deloitte for us saying we need auditing rules is kind of, you're asking the fox to guard the hen house. Yeah, sorry, the fox has a couple of hens.
No, exactly. I think I'll just quickly wrap it up so that we can address the other questions in the campaign as well. But just to add on to what you just said, Jacob, one of the other ways of looking at this, yes, no one can argue about BlackRock's portfolio. And I think when we talk about the link between bank account and Amazon forest fires, BlackRock was one of the culprits, which was behind funding some of the companies behind deforestation. People know that. However, to look at it from the other side, it was when Larry Fink wrote a letter to all his portfolio companies when the conversation on ESG and sustainable investing actually really kickstarted a lot, because they tend to have a lot of influence. And as what Jacob is pointing out, that they are coming in, if they come in from an advisory perspective, they actually have the potential to make this at scale. And that's what is really required. And eventually, at the end of the day, sustainable investing or any kind of investing needs to have a human-centered design approach, because sustainability, again, is such a broad topic that it has a different meaning for different people. So as long as transparency is there, as long as disclosures are done properly and communicated to the retail investor properly, it's up to you to choose. And if you don't want fossil fuel related portfolios, it should be available to you easily. You should be able to decipher that information. And I think that's what we would say, that getting involved doesn't really mean a bad thing necessarily, but it could mean some positives. But yes, as a consumer, you have to be aware. And I think that's where a lot of our work tends to happen. And that's why we are doing this webinar and the campaign. And we have a bunch of questions on the campaign, so I'll let Diane answer those questions. Diane, over to you.
Yeah, Perfect. Thanks, Mior. Thanks, Jacob. Yes, so I just wanted to answer both Carla's and Zane's question at the same time. So right now, what we're doing with the campaign is, yes, we're taking contact with a lot of partners. To be specific, I took contact with Fossil Free. I didn't with Urgewald, but I will. Thank you for the names. And so the idea of this first wave of the campaign is to raise awareness on the topic, because you might be aware of it, but not a lot of people are aware of the impact that their money have on this planet. And so that's where this hashtag #MyMoneyMyPlanet comes from. And that's the first wave and first objective we want to reach with this campaign. The second, and that is more Zane's question, is what are our plans beyond the selfie campaign? Well, that's more into dialogue with banks. So we know that a lot of banks are not having norms that fit for us to enable to reach the Paris Agreement. And so that's where we're working with some of our knowledge partners into getting to know what should we ask from banks once we've reached critical mass of people taking part in this campaign, and once we can have a dialogue with some of the financial institutions and ask, then request for not only more transparency, but then more sustainable finance. But that's more the second phase. But we're like focused first on, let's first succeed the first phase, and then we'll go on the second. I just wanted to answer Jonas's question on how sustainable your bank is. I didn't show it on the website, but I can actually show it right now on the website. During the campaign, we will have a lot of events. So this is the launch. We will have an event already and a webinar already next week on why we need an increased transparency on from our financial institutions with someone from the Frankfurt School. Then we will have more around investments and sustainable investments. Then, and this is the webinar that would be of interest to you, Jacob. Not Jacob. Jonas, yes, Jonas, sorry. Jonas, because this will be Julia from Facing Finance talking, and she will be talking about how sustainable you can, how sustainable your bank is, and how you can measure that, because there's a whole rating that has been done, and she will present that. So yeah, that's for me.
Jonas, just to answer your question, actually, because it was interesting, that question, because we did a webinar around 4 or 5 days back, where we actually went through bank ratings and how sustainability ratings of banks work as per the Fair Finance guide. So if you want, you can actually even go to our Facebook page, and the recording, the Facebook Live was done, so you could actually see it. Okay, I'll just take the last question. The last question, I think it's again directed at you, Jacob. If 2 Degrees is directly participating in the new taxonomy.
And we aren't in the technical expert group of the taxonomy. I think it's definitely a challenging process, also from a political perspective. Obviously, sustainability still is a very personal thing for many people, and it's not clear whether we want governments to decide at all times what is sustainable and what isn't. I think most of the people in the call probably would have a broader and more ambitious framing of sustainability than what comes out of a politically negotiated process, which is what this is effectively. So I think many of you will probably not be satisfied with what the EU calls green, simply because you're probably pretty motivated. You're listening to me and interested in this campaign, and that's a political process. So I think we need to just appreciate the need for standardization, of course, but also recognize that the difference between a political process. And I think the opportunity here is, with some of the technology coming out, some of these initiatives, is to make this a much more personal process, right? If you don't want to invest in fossil fuels, or if you want to have no carbon, but you don't want nuclear power, that should be your choice. It shouldn't have to depend on whether the EU has said nuclear power is fine or not fine, or gas is a transition fuel, or all these political negotiations, right? So I think that's quite important. When you talk to your banks, continue to represent your personal sustainability preferences, because when it comes to retail investing, those are king and queen. And if they are not complied with, then those banks are breaking the law right now. And you should know that, and you should call them out on it.
Okay, cool. Thanks a lot, Jacob. I think that was the last question. We have one more, but we've run out of time. Yes, there's a question on GLS. GLS is one of the best banks that is possible out there and as a sustainable bank. And Carla, your question is justified. The question is actually going out to banks which fortunately or unfortunately today own majority of the market share. And I'm not talking 80-20, I'm talking 99-1. And we want this question to be there for most of the people who can at least firstly get educated about the fact that your savings deposits impact the environment or other sustainability objective which you might be advocating for. So I think Carsten also had mentioned, and we know a lot of people since working in this space who will bank with the GLS or an Ethica or a Trados. But for us who are banking with sustainable banks, we need to be ambassadors and we need to lead the change, because the change needs to start, and the change is happening for sure, but it's happening way too slowly. And that's what we want to accelerate through the campaign. But your point taken is something that we'll be communicating, like Diane mentioned. This is not a one webinar launch. We are actually having a 1 month long launch with a series of events in which we're getting different experts, and they will come and talk about what we are actually trying to mean by transparency and different aspects which need to be clear to most of the people around. So that's what, it's an attempt from us to take this movement to the masses.
Yeah, Carla, if I just could add on your question, I think just this campaign is also a good reason to speak in a simple way about this issue, and just share with people who are not aware of it, and who might feel that money conversation is a bit cumbersome. So this campaign could be a good trigger to talk about the issue and enable them also to see the problem of the lack of transparency. So yeah. Cool. So I think we're done. Oh, this goes. Yeah. Okay, Henry, thanks for your comment. I will definitely look into it, but it's great to have feedback. Let me check it, and I can even make the change today.
Perfect. I think we've gone 5 minutes past time, and I know it's lunch hour for most of us. So Emma has put the website in the comments, so please check it out. Jacob, thanks a lot for your time. This was really great. And as we had discussed on the call, would love working and channeling the research for the right objectives and working together to make sustainability mainstream in finance. So that's the objective. So thanks a lot for coming, guys. Do follow the campaign. It's available all over the pages of MatterWest, and we are making a group also where we can keep you updated about these things. And yeah, look forward to seeing many of you take actions, which is the most important thing today. So thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Diane. And thank you everyone for joining. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.